Expand the circle. At the 1932 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles, a flashy Japanese equestrian named Shano Kido gave one of the most amazing performances in sports history. He managed to take the lead in a 22.12-mile 50 obstacle endurance race that he didn't normally compete in because his horse wasn't even trained for. However, he abruptly got out of the pack, and over the second-to-last jump, a gold medal was almost within his grasp. But he pulled the rein and dropped out of the race because he felt that the horse couldn't take it any longer, that even if he won, the horse would not survive the victory, as the plaque on the Friendship Bridge along California's Mount Rubido Trail honoring his extraordinary display of sportsmanship reads. Gandhi once said, "Whatever you have done to the least of my brethren in Milan, it says everything about us." Lieutenant Colonel Shunzo Kido turned away from the prize to save his horse because he heard the quiet voice of mercy rather than the loud acclaim of glory. How we treat our co-workers and strangers says a lot about us, as does how we treat the voiceless and defenseless other species. The intolerable sweetness of Kerou's account of the spring in Prague under the Soviet military occupation, the sensitive and kind female protagonist Teresa tells her husband that it is far more important to unearth a half-buried crow than to petition the president. Of course, politics and the major battles of our day are important, but so are the little things we rarely notice. A beautiful and kind practice to base one's plans around a practical as well as metaphorical reminder that even our smallest choices ripple through the world around us. The Jains of India, a religion that dates back to the 6th century BC and emphasizes respect for all living beings, would typically avoid making their pilgrimages during the rainy season because they didn't want to tread on the new grass underfoot. Gandhi was undoubtedly influenced by this, as his vegetarianism was the mother of all his other compassionate decisions. According to an ancient philosopher, kindness was greater than justice because justice dealt with the law as it applied to humans, but kindness also dealt with how we treat animals and all other living things. The Stoics were attempting to broaden the definition of who they owed justice and kindness to. Although Leonardo da Vinci is renowned for his masterful paintings and creations, his friends knew him as the type of person who would purchase a caged bird at a market so that he might release it, and even Abraham Lincoln was aware of what slavery was. His moral empathy was awakened when his younger stepbrother, John Daniel Johnson, caught a turtle and smashed it against a tree for fun. The turtle's painful and pointless death was too much for the boy who began, his stepsister reflected, to preach against cruelty to animals, contending that an ant's life was to it as sweet as ours to us. So, of course, years later, when Lincoln first saw slaves chained together, strung together precisely like so many fish on a trot line, as he vividly described it, he was just as appalled this was no way to treat anyone or anything. Of course, it's easier not to stop and think about what it must be like for a bird in a cage. It's easier to think only of the smell when you pass a factory farm, to think only of price as you're weighing two very differently sourced items at the supermarket. It's a pain to stop to catch a dog in the street, but just as we must concern ourselves about how the other half lives, we must consider the lives of billions and billions of other life forms on this planet. Have you watched the famous video where Coco the gorilla, after years of watching Mr. Rogers on television, finally gets to meet the man? In an instant, she reaches down to remove his famous blue shoes, a gesture of neighborliness from across the animal kingdom, a reminder that evolution has given many species the capacity for kindness too, and as a result obligates us to be kind too. K.O. The elder Co's great-grandfather was criticized in his own day for using up the animals who worked on his farm. He wasn't satisfied with just profiting from their labor. Instead, he worked them to death and then replaced them. This was perfectly legal and undoubtedly profitable, but it wasn't right. Like when we see an old map and discover that our ancestors divided up a whole continent a few generations ago based on what they could take from it. It's good that we flinch when we hear it. The Ivory Coast's Gold Coast. We must look at the careless, profitable cruelties in our own way of life and enterprises and try our best to address, or at least lessen them. It is foolish to believe that these inclinations and blatant exploitation have just vanished from the slave coast. The work of Temple Grandin, for instance, has helped reduce the suffering in slaughterhouses, just as the work of animal rights activists has challenged millions of people to question whether they should be eating meat at all. Both have different understandings of what justice is in this case, but both are making the world a better place. The same goes for hunters and farmers who have radically different relationships with wildlife than environmentalists, but in the best cases have found common cause in the preservation of endangered species, the climate and the world we all enjoy, just as each person ought to be able to sit under their own fig tree and not be afraid. So should the majestic wildlife on this planet, animals that have been here far longer than us, be allowed to survive and thrive and do what they do, and not just the majestic species or the cute ones. The fig tree itself deserves protection, the vine deserves rich soil, the rivers should flow unpolluted, the grass should be able to grow so high it bends under its own weight. As Marcus Aurelius once observed, the whole world is a temple. The Stoics said, nature is God. We commit a sacrilege when we abuse it. A man is really ethical. Albert Schweitzer wrote that he is only able to help all living things when he complies with the command to do so. When he goes out of his way to prevent harming any living thing, he does not question how much this or that life deserves sympathy as valuable in and of itself, or how much it can feel to him that life as such is sacred. This is what made Schweitzer a vegetarian and put aside most of his philosophical work to run medical clinics in Africa. He had a beautiful phrase that came to him on a boat trip in what is now Gabon, Africa. We have to care about all life forms, even though our lives are besieged by so many more personal or urgent cares, because it says something about us, because it is a legacy we will leave the future, and in fact, it may well determine whether there is a future. It should not come as a surprise that K.O., who was so indifferent to the lives of the animals he owned, was also a brutal slave owner, which is sort of the point. The reasoning that suggests some people are less significant than others because they are not related to us, live far away from us, or have different appearances, is also the reasoning that suggests other life forms are less significant. This is not only contrary to the values of justice, but it is also harmful to the individual who holds it. Rudeness and indifference. When there is cruelty in one place, it also affects the opportunity. According to philosopher Peter Singer, we improve the world and ourselves every day by widening the circle, which means that the more we open our hearts in one area, the more open we can be in others. I distribute a free Stoic-inspired email to almost 1 million people worldwide. If you would like to advance your Stoicism journey, I would love for you to subscribe. There is no spam, and you may unsubscribe at any time. Visit thebalancedlife.com. I hope to see you there.